You can fly, you can shoot, you can mine, you can loot. I feel like that one's gonna be memed for a long time, in the same way that It Just Works was, or the entire idea of horse armor. Hi, today I would like to talk about Starfield's review responses, and why Bethesda is responding to reviews, and why it's caused such a controversy? I don't know, this is a pretty tame controversy, all things considered, but it's still kind of interesting to talk about because everybody seems to have realized this all of a sudden, even though it had been happening since the game came out. So let's talk about it and see what's been going on. So for those that don't know, recently-ish, Starfield dropped down to a mixed overall rating on Steam. Basically, when there are enough negative reviews versus positive ones, Steam has an aggregate score that tells you if it's like a 60% positive overall reviewed game or if it's lower than that. And when it gets too low, then it turns into a mixed rating, which is seen as bad. It's like calling a game a 6 out of 10, and of course that's gonna stir up controversy, right? Because, review scores, they're so worth talking about, and aggregate scores are definitely worth analyzing. Oh, it gives me a headache sometimes. But what this did is it made players go in and start reading the negative reviews, and they started noticing something. Bethesda had been responding to a bunch of these reviews, which is not usually a thing that a big AAA developer and publisher will do, at least on Steam. This is not an unheard of practice, it actually happens all the time, but on Steam, you don't normally see it from a huge developer like Bethesda, EA, or Ubisoft, But that's not to say that this is a new thing for Bethesda either, because if you go and look at any of their games that they've published in the past, they very often do respond in very similar ways, and it never created a controversy. The only reason that this is really a controversy is because Starfield is such a big, disappointment to many, and people enjoy talking about the woes of the game, I guess. And look, I'm not going to defend Starfield. We're looking at my review right now, and I definitely did not like the game, and I haven't gone back and played it since. And this video isn't meant to defend Starfield or to tear it down. I just want to talk about the situation and why I think it's a little bit hilarious. So once people were looking at the review responses, they started noticing some patterns in their phrases, sentences, paragraphs, and general tone that all of them were seemingly taking, where they were just the same thing and often didn't address anything specific that was said in the negative review itself. And of course, because everybody wants to talk about how Starfield is a failure and it gets lots of clicks and everything, news outlets started covering it, YouTubers started covering it, and it became a whole thing. So we're gonna take a look at a few of these responses, but I'm also going to explain why these responses exist and why it's not as surprising to me as I feel like it is for others that they are appearing on Steam when big publishers and developers don't generally have a history of doing this. And I'll tell you right now, you're gonna see these types of things happening much more often with the majority of big AAA traditional marketed video games, because this is something that we've seen in the mobile game industry for 15 years now. And I know this because this used to be part of my job too, was responding to game reviews. So in places like the App Store or the Google Play Store, reviews have a bit of a different function than I think they traditionally do on Steam and in other areas and industries. And it's for a couple different reasons. So the two main ones are that the amount of reviews that you have are really important to getting new players. If you have a game with 200 reviews versus a game with 10,000 reviews, any potential new player is more likely going to try the game that has more reviews, even if its overall score is lower, because that shows that if your game is online, for example, it must have a healthier player base than the other one does. So you'll often see a game with a 3.5 out of 5 average review score consistently grow more than a game that has a 4.2 average review score with only a tenth of the reviews, just because if you see lots of people playing the game, then you're more likely to think that it's going to be a higher quality product regardless of the review score. That being said though, just because you want all the reviews doesn't mean that you don't also want all of the positive reviews. So when you play a mobile game for the first time, after a couple hours of play or so, you'll see that pop-up that says like, hey, are you enjoying the game? Do you want to give us a rating? And then you say like, yes, I'm enjoying it, or no, I'm not. And regardless of whichever option you choose, they will still prompt you to leave a review. And it sounds kind of weird that they would want you to leave a negative review on a game, because then you're dropping the game's overall aggregate score down potentially if enough people are leaving negative reviews. But because of the importance of amounts of reviews on the app stores, that's something that developers just have to do. They need to get as many reviews as they can. But that can have problems, because if a game goes through a major controversy in its player base, or there's something consistent that keeps getting brought up and the review score drops too low, then eventually, even if you have lots of players, you're going to start losing money. And they'll also miss out on the opportunity to be featured on like the front page of the App Store and other similar things like that, because in order to generally get featured, you need to have a review score of around 4 or higher. So these App Store developers figured out that if you respond to every negative review and try to engage with your player base, you're more likely to turn that negative review into a positive one if you either fix their problem or you address it in some way. This is also just a really good move for PR, because if you are a new player again and you go to a game and see that it has a negative review, but there's a developer response to it, then you're more likely to think that, oh, this developer maybe did something that the players didn't like, or there's a problem with this game, but they're at least aware of it and they're trying to fix it. So every response to a negative review can either have the benefit of turning it into a positive review instead, which increases your score, or at the very least you get another review, and every review is important, and you also get to respond to the either criticism or the complaint that the player has in order to at least get a little bit of positive PR and lessen the blow from that negative review. And that's exactly what we're seeing Bethesda do with Starfield and the other games that they published over the last few years. But the problem is Bethesda doesn't seem to understand how to leave these review responses without sounding extremely pretentious and riling everyone up even further. As a whole, they just seem to not know how to read the room. You'll notice a particular trend with a lot of these review responses where they don't necessarily address any of the common complaints, and they instead seek to minimize the complaints or offer really bad attempts at humor, or straight up just try to tell players how to enjoy the game, and even at some points go against the entire concept of how the game is supposed to work. So let's take a look at the review response to my review. We'll just go ahead and look at this one first, and then we'll get into some other ones. They started off with, you can fly, you can shoot, you can mine, you can loot. Great tagline if you're making an advertisement for the game. Not so great if you're responding to criticisms, especially when those criticisms often include flying, shooting, mining, and looting. Like, the presence of all of those things does not automatically make them good. Starfield is an RPG with hundreds of hours of quests to complete and characters to meet. Yes, again, factually correct. Does not address the issues brought up in my review and many other reviews saying that the quests and characters that you meet are bad. Most quests will also vary on your character's skills and decisions, massively changing the outcome of your playthrough. I dispute this because aside from having certain skills unlock unique dialogue options, the majority of them just loop back into the 1 or 2 binary choices that are contained within each quest that result in 1 of 2 outcomes. Generally either goody two-shoes or comically evil mustache twirling bad guy. And this is where it gets a little bit, I would say, condescending, and this is like a tone that you'll notice in a lot of these reviews. They then go and try to explain to you how they believe you should properly be playing the game, and it doesn't even make sense, which is the really kind of funny part. So it says, try creating different characters with backgrounds and characteristics that clash or are opposite of your previous character. You will feel like you are playing a totally different game. Put points in different skills from a character you've previously created, and you are now faced with completely different decisions to make and difficulties to encounter. There are so many layers to Starfield that you will find things you've never knew were possible after playing for hundreds of hours. Wait, you've never knew? You have never knew? Words and stuff. Okay, so I really don't like the idea that the developers are trying to tell you like, hey, you're just not playing the game right. You should try using different skills and things and varying it up, and you'll see that the game is a completely different experience, even though, spoiler alert, it's really not gonna be. But the thing that irks me about it is they're so confident that doing this will somehow fix your experience in the game, and the reality is that that doesn't even really go with the entire concept of a major feature in the game, which is New Game Plus. So spoiler alerts for Starfield, when you get to the end of the game, you are shoved into a New Game Plus scenario that you can decide you want to do, or you can go back to your original universe. If you do the New Game Plus, it restarts the game, but you keep your character and its traits and all the skills that you've accumulated up until that point. And this is supposed to be a way to go through the game again, to keep leveling infinitely, and to always have more stuff to do and experience in the game. Except that when you do that, you don't get to choose different traits and recreate your character in any way. You're still stuck with the same one. So what they're essentially asking you to do here is ignore the New Game Plus feature entirely and go back to the main menu and just start a new game and pick different traits instead of engaging in something that was supposed to be a really big selling point and major aspect of their game. So it really just doesn't make sense in the greater context of the game, and it comes across as incredibly pretentious and almost like they don't fully understand their own product. And it gets worse when they get into the second paragraph here, where it says, you will also find our site provides many helpful articles if any aspect of Starfield feels overwhelming. So that kind of throws shade at the reviewer, because it's saying that, oh, you just didn't understand our game. If you understood the game more, you would love it, just like we do, just like everybody else does. So if it's too overwhelming for you, if your brain is too tiny, too small, you can go to our website and we'll explain to you exactly how to have fun in our game. For example, you can see the following for some tips and tricks on outpost building and management. You will also find some additional tips of shipbuilding that may help it feel like less of a maze. And again, this doesn't really address any of the things that are brought up in the reviews, because things like outpost building just seems like it doesn't really have a point in the game, which is something that myself and many other people have brought up repeatedly. So understanding how to make the perfect outpost and how to fully automate anything doesn't really have a point to it, because the outposts themselves don't seem to have a point at all. And in regards to tips for shipbuilding that make the ships feel like less of a maze, that should just have not been a thing to begin with. I should be able to put any of my ship modules together and then not have the game decide arbitrarily where they want all the hallways to be for me. I should be able to put any two habitat modules together and then choose where I want the doorways to be. But when you have to describe your own shipbuilding as a maze, that's kind of a problem. Oh dear God, this one is really hard to read. Okay, so I'm very convinced that this one was heavily copied and pasted, because generally when you do that, if you copy from one text app to another, a lot of the time it will like mess up the paragraphs and like smush everything together. That's really what it looks like here, like they just copied and pasted it and then hit send. So it says, "Hi, we appreciate you taking the time to provide your review, and sorry to hear that you did not enjoy your time in Starfield. If you feel that things are getting boring, there is so much more to do than just the main mission. There are many side missions where you can learn more about the people and story of Starfield." So they're saying that if you find the main story is boring, you'll have way more fun with the side quests. Instead of saying like, hey, sorry the main story was boring, how can we improve it? They're just saying, oh, go and play our other quests and keep playing the game anyways, even though you don't like it. And they just go further into explaining all of the different things that you can do in the game, assuming that this player who put 75 hours into the game didn't try all of them because the only thing that they mentioned was the story. So that turns this review response into being a response that was actually intended for the person that left the negative review for the game into just advertisement for any other potential customer that stumbles upon the review and sees the response. They can be like, oh, I can do more than just the main story. And yes, that is 100% part of the reason that review responses exist, but you need to at least try to hide it or address something that the player review that you're responding to brings up without sounding like a condescending jerk. Oh god, again, there are so many layers with Starfield that you will find things you never knew were possible after playing for hundreds of hours. But this player doesn't want to play anymore and they only had 75 hours. You can continue on to New Game Plus to keep exploring Starfield and all that is out there, but you told me not to use New Game Plus! What is the correct way to play this video game? Should I do it this way, or should I do it the way that you told me to do it? Don't explain to me the correct way to play your game if even you don't know how. This one is really, really bad. Thank you for taking the time to provide your review, and we are sorry to hear that you were disappointed with encountering many loading screens while playing. While there may be many loading screens in between fast traveling, just consider the amount of data for the expansive gameplay that is procedurally generated to load flawlessly in under 3 seconds. We believe that shortcoming will not hinder our players from getting lost in the world we created. If you make so much data that your engine requires more and more loading screens just for the game to function smoothly, that is a problem with the development of your game. Starfield is an RPG with hundreds of hours of quests to complete and characters to meet. No! No! No more! We've already done this one. Given the immense size of Starfield, we felt it made more sense to be able to use your grav drive to jump to other solar systems. The option to fly freely among planets is still there, and you can travel from one planet to another and land without needing to open up your map if you use the scanner. That's the same thing as fast traveling. You just don't press the M button to open up your map. It's the same mechanic. You can't say it's a different mechanic when it's the same mechanic. However, for an expedition like solar system traversal, jumping is necessary. Remember that fast travel also has its perks, as you can do so quickly when trying to complete quests and will always be given visual of your ship launching and landing, thus being able to appreciate all the little details that make your customized ship look unique. You know what makes me appreciate all the little details of my customized ship and makes it feel unique? Piloting it and being able to land it myself. To keep Starfield as dynamic as possible, NPCs are not fully scripted, so weirdness can ensue sometimes. Wait. To keep Starfield as dynamic as possible, NPCs are not fully scripted? How does that make it more dynamic? The goal is to make believable characters on the screen with realistic reactions to your character. Where is that in the game? If I go and stand in the middle of New Atlantis and fire my gun in the air a billion times, I don't even get a ticket. People just go about their day. Like, at least in Skyrim or Fallout, people would be annoyed if I like sprinted straight into them. Or if I dropped something on the ground, they'd comment on it, try to give it back to me or something. Like, at least they made an effort. We are sorry that you do not like landing on different planets and are finding many of them empty. The intention of Starfield's exploration is to evoke a feeling of smallness in players and make you feel overwhelmed. How exactly are you supposed to feel overwhelmed by a game in a vast universe when every time you try to go to any location in that universe, you need to load a new cell to get there? How are you supposed to feel overwhelmed when the majority of the planets that you land on are barren and have absolutely nothing on them? Or at the very most, have the same 15 points of interest that you have seen a billion times before? How am I, as a player, supposed to feel overwhelmed when I go to the exact same abandoned military outpost that has the same guard sitting in a chair on the top of it that I sneak up behind because the AI doesn't see me when I'm right in front of him. I kill him, then I go inside and I find the same packs of food and the same handwritten notes that tell the same story on every different planet, even on the same planet if I go to any other landing spot on it. I must say, I feel very whelmed by that. So this one's hilarious because they literally just accused this player of being bad at the game when they said they didn't like the space physics and controls. The player said, "The deal breaker for me was the awful space combat with horrible controls and wonky space physics." Bethesda's response was, "When starting your journey, you will need to be careful what type of encounters you can handle until upgrading your character's levels and skills. We have some guides that may help you with getting started on combat." He said he didn't like it, not that it was too hard. They literally posted a response that says, "You're mad 'cause bad." I don't get it. How can you miss the point so thoroughly on every single one of these reviews? Again, I understand it. These are less about responding to the review itself and more about the presence of a response being there for any potential new players, because a lot of these players are probably long gone from the game already. But you can't just gaslight your entire player base like this and ignore their critiques. Either ignore them and don't respond, or address them when you do respond. You don't get to have it both ways. We can understand your frustration with how the UI functions within the game. Starfield's art direction and overall UI aesthetic is meant to be cohesive and have a NASA punk look. What is NASA punk? Menus are clean, bold, and neatly organized? No, I'm done. I'm flippin' done. The skill menu is colorful and iconic while the inventory shows off items, weapons, and armor in a visually striking way. Having a gun take up the majority of your screen when you're trying to navigate your inventory isn't NASA punk. It's artistic self-fellatio.